To the Authority of Love. I'm your host, Greg Williams, and today is another fabulous Family Foundation Friday with Executive Director, Mr. David Walls. Welcome, David.
Greg, good to be with you, brother.
Yeah. Now this is interesting. We always known that we've been connected when we do these things spiritually because of the Holy Spirit, but technology allows us to do this while I'm in Nicholasville, Kentucky, and you're in what part of South Carolina?
Charleston.
Charleston. Okay, I got a lot of good friends down there. I used to run a program here in the state that started in Charleston, South Carolina. So you may meet some of them. There's a lot going on. You've got a lot to share on numerous levels. I want to just do this. Let me start by saying that I had several texts from you last week to pray and to keep on praying. And so I did, because there was a lot of shenanigans. That's just a big legislative word, right?
Right. For normal operations.
Normal operations, right. And there was a lot of deception that was going on. Let's just call it what it was. And it looked bad at one moment, right? You're going to fill us in. But prayer works. And I'm just going to let you fill our listeners in, because this is a tribute to the Family Foundation, what you guys have done, to our listeners and many others who got involved, prayed, and moved. So catch us up. Tell us what happened. Tell us the story.
Yeah, Greg, really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you. And, we had to miss a Family Foundation Friday last Friday.
So we just repeated. Yeah,
we repeated, but, there was so much going on. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity to reconnect with you this Friday and talk about some important ways that the Lord moved. So
thank you.
Greg, over the last several weeks that we've been doing these Fridays, we've talked about a number of different issues, but I'll just mention three that have been kind of front and center. And one of those has been what was House Bill 470, the Do No Harm Act, to stop these just unbelievably harmful gender transition surgeries and hormone experimentation that's going on our children. We talked a lot about the issue of parental rights, and particularly in the context of education, and stopping some of the LGBT indoctrination, empowering parents in the education context. And then we also talked about the Student Privacy Act, the need to protect a common sense privacy policy that protects our students in our schools and says boys use boys facilities, girls use girls. So you and I have talked a lot about those three issues, and they all kind of came together in a final sprint the last 48 hours before Thursday of last week, which was the deadline before the veto period that we are now in. And so, Greg, at that time on Wednesday of last week, we were hopeful that the Help Not Harm Act to protect our kids from gender transition, it had already passed the Senate. It had already passed the House.
Okay.
And we were in a final push to try to get that and the parental rights issue together and out of the Senate and have that issue be done. And what ended up happening, there was a hearing on Wednesday, and then they brought the bill up on the Senate floor Wednesday night, the day before the deadline. And what we saw, and we've called this out, and we want to just be truthful with what's folks. There was a very concerning attempt that was almost successful to essentially gut the protections for our kids in that bill. There was a Republican Senator, Danny Carroll, offered an amendment that ended up being supported by 12 Republicans and all the Democrats in the Senate that actually gutted that bill and actually partially turned it into...
Flipped it, right? Why would they do that?
So I want to be, I think a lot of different reasons for some of the folks, and there'll be a lot of questions that need to be asked by some that voted for this. But I want to get to the good part of the story too.
Right.
But I think for some, they were doing the work that the medical community wanted, and they don't like to see these kinds of bills protecting students because, again, as we've talked about, this is a very highly profitable area of quote unquote medicine, not really medicine. I think there was some confusion just because of everything that was going on at the Capitol. We did our best ahead of the floor vote to try to inform every senator that what they were about to vote on was actually the exact opposite of the intention of the bill. It actually would have, while stopping the surgeries, it would have provided legalization for the hormone experimentation, which is, Greg, you and I talked previously, that is the gateway. Once we buy into the idea that it is okay to essentially experiment around with a child's puberty and say, well, we're going to start blocking their puberty to quote unquote give them more time to decide what sex they are. I mean, we are so far away from what we know to be true about how we were created, and certainly what we know to be true about kids. So on Wednesday night, there was a vote. It was 18-17, and they voted to pass an amendment to essentially rewrite that bill in a very troubling way. And I will tell you, God moved. There was some procedural moves that were put in place right after that vote to keep the final vote from happening. And what that essentially allowed us was to have one more day to try to address the issue and fix that bill. And I will tell you, there was a number of folks that worked through the night, and I'm still hearing stories about legislators, advocates, pastors, folks that were helping. Essentially, what had to happen is we had to regain the support of a significant amount of folks. And I won't go into all the details, but God moved. And on Friday, what ended up happening is there was a shift, and we moved the legislature moves some of these components into another bill that had already been worked on and was in the process, Senate Bill 150, which was a parental rights bill. And so, not to get in the weeds of the bill numbers, what ended up happening was Senate Bill 150 was amended with some of the parental rights language that we have been working so hard on, that would actually say in K through 12, you cannot promote or discuss sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. I think this might be the first piece of legislation that addresses that in all 12 grade levels. It does a number of other things in the parental rights context. There was a modified version of the Help Not Harm Act that will protect our kids from surgeries and hormones and rein that horrific industry in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And then additionally, effectively, House Bill 30, Bill Wesley's Student Privacy Act, was also included in there. So it's really three very important bills, all with the theme of protecting our kids, standing up for what's right, empowering parents. And so that amended bill moved through committee quickly. It passed the House in the evening, and then it passed the Senate even later in the evening with overwhelming support. And so God there's too many ways to share in which God moved. But so essentially three of the important bills that, again, this is not just about the Family Foundation. There's so many folks involved in working some of these important issues. They got across the finish line, but there's some important steps still left.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing here, David, and it's what I want to say from the standpoint of the authority of love message, and I know you echo this, prayer works.
Yes.
Prayer works. And because you and I talked about the prayers were expose any of the lies or deceptions, reveal the truth, and then let people have the courage and humility to respond to that. And not only did they do it, but we talked about do no harm or help not harm and parental rights and privacy act, how while they're not exactly the same, they are very closely connected and related in what's going on here. And to be able to then, when it looked dire, to turn that around and pull all those together and bring them out in one solid bill and get overwhelming support, that had to be nothing short of the Holy Spirit moving at that time. So keep telling us to pray. We'll keep doing. All right. I hope our listeners are hearing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that bill now is on the governor's desk. And,
what happens now? What happens then?
Yeah. So he had already indicated before the bill got, essentially beefed up with several different additional provisions that he was going to veto Senate Bill 150, or at least had given strong inclination. So we are closely tracking. Look, we have called for the governor to just step forward and do what's right, stand with parents, stand for protecting kids, and sign this into law. But if he doesn't, which is not too unfamiliar to us, if folks will remember last legislative session when the Save Women's Sports Law was passed, he vetoed that, and then the legislature overrode him. So here in Kentucky, it only takes a simple majority to override a governor's veto. There were very strong majorities that supported SB 150. And so essentially, if he vetoes it in this veto period, the legislature has 2 final days where they reconvene the last 2 days of the session, the 29th and 30th of this month. And they would be able to override that the governor's veto and take care of some other business, other bills that are still outstanding.
Speak briefly to that, David, because you just told us he can veto, but they can come back, and there's still other things that can happen. More bills out there still, and some action, right? So what do we need to do as far as praying?
Yeah, there are the sports betting bill, which would be the largest expansion of predatory gambling in the history of the Commonwealth. That issue is still alive and could very well be taken up. I think all it needs to do is pass out of the Senate. The issue of medical marijuana was moving at the very end of this the last week as well. So that issue, and then there's some other good bills that are still alive. Senate Bill 115 got a reading at the very end of the session. That's the bill that would protect against adult-oriented performances and these so-called drag performances that are targeting our kids. That issue is still alive. So look, this is an important time. We encouraged our folks, Greg. There was some spiritual battles that have taken place, and there was some ugly things that were said to the legislators, including LGBT advocates that were screaming profanities in the Senate chamber when this bill passed. We have been encouraging our folks to take a moment. You can go to our website at KentuckyFamily.org and see how folks voted on some of these issues, and reach out to them and encourage them and thank them for their vote on SB 150. And stay tuned for some important updates as we head to the last 2 days.
Yeah, and we'll get back next Friday, Lord willing, to do that again, and we'll hear even more. And we trust in faith that we're going to continue to hear some more victories and continue working for that. So want to thank the listeners. Thank you, David. Remember, if you're not listening at WJMM 99.1 FM, Central Kentucky Christian Radio, you can go to WJMM.com, click on the podcast tab near upper right. Love and Lordship links get today's and the previous 2 days. You can also go to loveandlordship.com and find out much more. And KentuckyFamily.org/take action. And that will get you a lot of information, not only information, but action items that they can follow through on. So, David, thanks again for joining us. We look forward to hearing more good news next Friday. And thank you for listening. Thanks for your to the Lord. Thanks for your prayers. And stay tuned now for Bill Reeser and Encounter. And then not long after that, Greg Horn and Hope is here. I'm Greg Williams, and you're listening to the Authority of Love.